Pseudo-Dionysius of Telmare, Chronicle Part 3, translated with notes and introduction by Witold Witatowski. Chronicle, known also as the Chronicle of Zuqnin, Part 3, Dionysius of Telmare, Patriarch of Antioch, 845. It's probably 845 AD. Translated text for historians. This series is designed to meet the needs of students of ancient and medieval history and others who wish to broaden their study by reading source material, but whose knowledge of Latin or Greek is not sufficient to allow them to do so in the original language. Many important late imperial and dark age texts are currently unavailable in translation, and it is hoped that WTH, that's translated text for historians, will help to fill this gap and to complement the secondary literature in English which already exists. The series relates principally to the period 300 to 800 AD and includes late imperial, Greek, Byzantine and Syriac texts, as well as source books illustrating a particular period or theme. Each volume is a self-contained scholarly translation with an introductory essay on a text and its author and notes on the text indicating major problems of interpretation, including textual difficulties, and its editorial committee and the general editors. We try to find part 1, but it wasn't available. We'll keep looking for it. We may find it one day, and we'll bring it to you in a video format. And the front cover drawing is a miniature from the Gospels of Beth Zabdi in the 12th century. The plate of Perm, 6th century, now in the Hermitage, St. Petersburg. Is that Russia? Contents page. First published 1996 by Liverpool University Press. Headings and brackets do not appear in the text. So, footnote indication there. Acknowledgements. Bibliography and abbreviations. Introduction. The Syriac historiographical work, of which the third part is presented here in translation, is a universal chronicle which came into being in northern Mesopotamia at the end of the 8th century AD. Its author is unknown, perhaps simply because of the poor state of preservation of the unique manuscript of the work. Due to an early attribution, see 1-2 below, it says at the bottom here something in Latin, so reference possibly. Later proved false. He is usually referred to as Pseudo-Dionysius. This conventional name has been perpetuated by the title of the standard edition of the Syriac text, Inserti Anctoris Chronicon Pseudo-Dionysianum Vulgo Dictum, edition 1 by B. Chabot, 1-2, etc., etc. This conventional name has been perpetuated by the title of the standard edition of the Syriac text, not likely to be replaced in the near future, and will consequently be retained here. As the place where the chronicler lived has proved to be the monastery of Zuqnin, the other conventional title by which the work is sometimes referred to is the Chronicle of Zuqnin. Presenting to the public an English translation of only the third part of, see section 2 below, of Pseudo-Dionysius Chronicle may seem somewhat arbitrary, but the decision to do so was made when this part was still the only one for which no full translation into any European language existed. The third part, moreover, has a value of its own quite independently of the rest of the Chronicle, due to its being based on an original historiographical work contemporary with the events recounted, as well as to its distinctive point of view, that of the representative of a dissident religious community at a crucial period of its development. It thus constitutes an important source for the history of Byzantium in the 6th century, covering roughly the reigns of Anastasius, Justin I, and Justinian. The contemporary historiographical work in question is the otherwise lost second part of the church history of John of Ephesus, a Syrian of Monophysite conviction. See 2:1 below. A monk later to become a bishop, he had often participated in the events he described. He lived during a difficult period in the history of the Monophysite movement, for a time sharing the afflictions of the persecution together with other non-conformist monks of the same persuasion. As an eyewitness, he provides a vivid picture of the persecution, depicting the events from the perspective of the underdog, a perspective seldom supplied by the Greek historiography of the epoch. It's probably of the age. John's work is even more valuable as, in addition to an account of events in the eastern provinces, it also provides an insight into Constantinopolitan affairs. For in time John moved to the capital, even gaining access to Justinian's court. Is that Emperor Justinian? One of the emperor's aims was the religious unification of the empire, and John covered episodes of the campaign against Manichaeans and pagans in his narrative. Though still a religious dissident, he had no objections to taking an active part in Justinian's plans, and in a passage often referred to, he proudly informs us of his missionary successes among the pagans in Asia Minor. He is more reticent about Justinian's continued efforts to bring unity to the church by means of discussions between representatives of the Chalcedonian and the Monophysite forms of Christianity. Perhaps our author cherished hopes that the Chalcedonian or imperial side would be won over for Monophysitism, and when things did not turn out that way, he may have felt less anxious to give a fuller account of the matter. John also gave us an original account of the great Justinian plague, far longer than those provided by other Byzantine historians, penned in an emotional style with the help of numerous quotations from Old Testament prophets. It contrasts with the calmer account of, say, Procopius. Yet it is worth reading, since it has caught and transmitted to us the atmosphere of a bitterly tormented Constantinople, which lost hundreds of thousands of its inhabitants during that plague. For the reigns of Anastasius and Justin I, covered in the earlier sections of the part translated here, John must of course have used written sources. Notwithstanding the fact that much of this material may be known from elsewhere, even so, these sections remain important for two reasons. The first is that his main source, the Chronicle of Malalas, appears in John of Ephesus, i.e. Pseudo-Dionysius, in its original form, longer than that which is known to us from the independent transmission. The other reason is again the way in which our historian's point of view colours his narrative. He treats most of the events and persons with which he deals from the point of view of a dissident who is passionate about his cause, thus providing us with a perspective on these events and persons different from that of orthodox Byzantine historiography. Introduction. 1. The Chronicle as a whole. 1.1. The manuscript and editions. The manuscript, preserved today in the Vatican Library, Syriac 162-173 folds, and has a footnote here down the bottom. Looks like it's in Latin. Looks like the Apostolic Vatican Codex book manuscript catalogue. Apostolic, the Apostolic Biblical book manuscript book catalogue, something like that. We're just assuming that we can't really read Latin, so we're just assuming that's what it means. The manuscript preserved today in the Vatican Library, Syrian 162, 173 foals, was brought there in 1715 from the monastery of St. Mary of the Syrians, Dea es Syriani, in the Nitrian desert in Egypt by J.S. Assemani, who through his purchases laid the foundation for the Vatican Library Syriac manuscript collection. By a happy coincidence, some of the missing folios, so that's what that folio is, 173 folios, it's folios, of the manuscript were brought to England from the same monastery by H. Tatab in 1842 and are preserved today in the British Library edition 1465, folios 1 to 7. Okay, it's got a footnote here. W. Wright, Catalogue of Syriac Manuscripts in the British Museum, acquired since the year 1838. 3. London, 1872. Page 218F. The manuscript is a palimpsest, 1, 2, 3 Vatican folios and all the London folios. The overwritten text being Greek Old Testament excerpts of the 7th or 8th century, and it's published by E. Tisserant. The footnote below. The Syriac text dates from the, and it's questionable here, early 9th century and must have been written in Zuqnin. We infer this from the colophon on folio 66V, which was copied to replace what was probably a lost original folio. The scribe of the folio left a note which reads, "Pray for the wretched Elisha of the monastery of Zuqnin, who copied Syriac Tab. This leaf that he might obtain mercy like the robber on the right hand of Jesus. Amen and Amen." PD 1241. Note 6, or I'm not too sure what that is. He may be identical with the scribes Elisha of Zuqnin, who, according to a colophon of the year 903 and another manuscript of the British Library, Oregon maybe? 5021, lived as an anchorite in Egypt. And footnote says, F. No, in his review of E. Tisserant's work, see previous note, Roch, Roman Church, 16, 9 to 11, page 137F. Okay, he may be identical with the scribe Elisha of Zuqnin, who, according to a colophon of the year 903 and another manuscript of the British Library, lived as an anchorite in Egypt. If this is the same person, then he must have copied folio 66 of PD's text while still in Zuqnin. As the chronicle was composed in that monastery, see 1 and 2 below, footnote, and one of its folios was replaced there at the end of the 9th century, then our manuscript almost certainly came into being there too. Later, it is generally believed the manuscript was brought to Dea es Syriani by Archimandrite Moses of Nisibis, who in the years 926 and 932 collected 250 manuscripts from Syrian and Mesopotamian monastic libraries and transported them to Egypt. There also exists a copy today in the Bibliothèque Nationale Paris Syriac 284-285 made by Paul and Martin in 1867 from the Vatican manuscript folios 44 to 152. Although marred by faults, the copy proved important for the establishment of the text for the critical edition. The Vatican manuscript has deteriorated since Martin's time, and the editor used this copy to restore many illegible passages. J.S. Assemani estimated the value of the text as a historical source very highly. Accordingly, he adopted a number of excerpts from it in his monumental collections of Syriac writings, known generally as the Bibliotheca Orientalis, which he published in 4 octavo volumes. Octavo, isn't it 8? Not too sure now. Not too sure now. In the 19th century, 2 partial editions of the Chronicle appeared. That of the first part, up to folio 43, was prepared by O.F. Tolberg, and that of the fourth and last part, folio 121 to the end of the Vatican manuscript by J. B. Chabot, the latter being provided with a French translation. The standard edition of the full text of the work was produced in the years 1927 to 33 by the same Jean-Baptiste Chabot for the Syriac series of the Corpus Scriptorum Christianorum Orientalium. Obviously that's Latin. Looks at the Oriental Christian body script, by the sounds of it, or book. It's kind of hard, don't know Latin that well. In 2 volumes, henceforth, you can usually guess at it. PD1 and PD2, it's the abbreviation. So that's the body of this Christian Oriental script. That's probably what it is. Okay. Before his death in 1949, Chabot managed to publish only the translation into Latin of the first half of the text, PD1, and thus until 1990 when R. Hitzpel's French translation of the second half, PD2, appeared. Apart from some fragments, only the third part remained inaccessible to those unable to read Syriac. And footnotes below here state a German translation of the section dealing with the United surrounding events was published by N. Pigulowiskaya in Byzanz auf den Wegen nach Indien in Berlin, 1969. Yeah, that looks like a... Yeah, not too sure what that is in German. Something to do with the Byzantine. 1969, BBA 36, and so forth. Excerpts on the Paris manuscript in French by F. Now, and so forth. Okay, where do we leave off? Okay. J.S. Assemini thought that the chronicle he had in his hands was the work of the Syrian Orthodox Jacobite patriarch Dionysius of Talmare 845, whom he knew to have written a chronicle. Consequently, the fragments published in the Bibliotheca Orientalis, as well as the 2 19th century partial editions, bear the patriarch's name as that of the author. The view that Dionysius of Talmare was the author of the Chronicles survived until 1896, when 2 scholars, Francois Nau and Theodore Neudeke, proved independently of each other that it could not have been the work of the patriarch. And here is a note here in the footnotes. But if now, looks like it's in French, in German, No, Deke in his review of Chabot's edition of PD's Part 4 and Wiener Zeitschrift für die Kunde des Morgenlandes, 10, page 160 to 170, they argued that other Syriac historians, Michael the Syrian, Bar Hebraeus, who quoted Patriarch Dionysius' work, knew nothing about the Chronicles of Joshua the Stylite, which is preserved nowhere but in PD, whereas the quotations from the Patriarch could not be found in the text of PD. Moreover, the latter wrote in 775, whereas Dionysius was Patriarch 818 to 845 and wrote his work towards the end of his life. Since, however, no positive identification of the author could be provided, the name of the patriarch, though with the addition of pseudo, which features on the title page of J.B. Chabot's edition of the Syriac text, as well as on those of both CSCO translation volumes, is still used as the conventional name of the author, henceforth PD. All we know about him is what can be deduced from the text itself. He lived in the 8th century, as can be inferred from autobiographical details. He knew some ecclesiastics of the age. He met a false prophet in 770/771, etc. And from the date of his working on the Chronicle, its last dated lemma is 1085 of the Seleucid era, 773/74 AD, but it might very well have been 1086. Was it Seleucid or something? Had the last folios not been lost. Yeah, 1086 Seleucid. Though we do not know when he started writing the Chronicle, we do know that he was at work in 775, as it is revealed by the dates provided in the introduction to the fourth part, PD2 146 5-7/108F. The year 1086 of the Seleucid era, October 774 to September 775 AD, and so forth. Apparently, and 158 of the Hijra, 11 November 774 to 30 October 775. But as he informs us in another preface, that to the whole work, very badly preserved, PD2 419 2731, apparently added after the completion of the work. He finished it in the year 1087 of Alexander the Macedonian, so it would be Alexander the Great, right? 775/6 AD, in which Mahdi, son of Abdullah, comes to power. So is that a caliphate? The Arabs, 775 AD, and Leo, son of Constantine, begins to rule over the Greeks, 24 September 775. On the basis of some expressions of the type, a monastery of Zuqnin, which occur in the text of the fourth part, for example PD2 2061/159, as well as from the dedication of the work to some persons of the Syriac monastery, PD2 420 8-12, it can be established that the chronicler was a resident of that monastic house located just north of Ahmed, modern Diyarbakir in southeastern Turkey. Some scholars have attempted to identify the author as a stylite of Zuqnin by the name of Joshua. The basis of this supposition was a second note of the scribe Elisha, found after the one already quoted on folio 66v. May the grace of the great God and our Saviour Jesus Christ be upon the priest Mar Joshua, the stylite of the monastic house of Zuqnin, who wrote or copied Syriac Tab, this book of records of the evil times which passed, and of the horrors and terrors which this tyrant did to the people. It was again Ifnal who in 1897 asserted that this colophon provided the name of the actual author of the whole Chronicle of PD. On the authority of Ifnal, the identification of Pseudo-Dionysius as Joshua the stylite was adopted by a number of renowned Sirologists. They must be proficient in Syriology or all about Syria, texts and everything. It is true that if Haas refuted this opinion in 1916, but it has recently been revived by A. Palmer, and footnote indicates here below. In his review of Witkowski, Syriac Chronicle in Abba Narain 28, 1990, paragraph 144F, or page 144F. Since I find Now's argument convincing, I shall call the author of the Zuqnin Chronicle Yeshu, the Syriac form of Joshua. However, in an article published in the same year, who wrote page 274, A. Palmer takes another stand and writes, the compiler of the Chronicle ending in AD 775 was a monk of Zuqnin. So was Joshua, but this does not entail that Joshua was the compiler, as was suggested by now. Thus, Joshua the stylite, being a Zuqninian, could not be the author of the chronicle hitherto attributed to him, and in this case apparently because he had to be the author of something, now concluded that he was the author of the whole PSD, the Onysian Chronicle. However, neither Nau's premise nor its conclusion, endorsed by A. Palmer and Abranarain, is necessarily true. Firstly, it can be pointed out that Joshua's knowledge of Edessa's vicissitudes and his being a stylist in Zuqnin are not mutually exclusive, since he might have lived both in Edessa and in Zuqnin at different times. He is well informed not only about Edessene affairs but also about events in Ahmed. This was noted by F. Hassa in his book 1920, and also by A. Palmer, who wrote, it's his book, or an article, page 275. Recording that vicissitudes of the latter city in the vicinity of which Zuqnin was situated, was evidently as important to him as recording those of Edessa, as can be inferred from the fact that he put the names of both cities in the title of his chronicle, cited below. If he was a native of Edessa, which would account for his acquaintance with events there, he might have written his book after he had moved from that city to Zuqnin, a move which would explain the Amadine sections of his work